Peter? Oh, should I wear this thing? This better?
See.
Hello?
You're live.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live episode of the Peter Schiff Show podcast here on YouTube. Been a very busy day, very busy week. I've been doing a lot of podcasts, as you notice. I've been trying to do one every day because there's been so much stuff happening every day, and I have so much stuff to talk about. It's even hard to restrict the length of the podcast, but I have a lot of stuff to do. And so you end up getting them kind of late at night. Plus the upload speed here, for some reason, in Puerto Rico has slowed down quite a bit. So sometimes it's taken me a long time to get the podcasts uploaded. But I wanted to do one today live. I wanted to take some questions because I spent a lot of time today, watching the financial media. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I just heard some of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard said by a lot of people who I respect, who are very smart people, good businessmen, good asset managers. But everybody has lost their minds. I mean, this is really, the most idiotic thing I've ever seen. And, the economy is about to implode. I mean, that much is pretty sure. And I have been warning about a lot of this stuff for a long time. If people read my first book, Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse, that book came out in 2007. Before the blowing up of the subprime bubble. That was the pin that really pricked that financial crisis and led to the Great Recession. Well, when I wrote that book, I didn't know that the pin for the real crash, which was the topic or the title of my one of my later books, and the reason I called it the real crash was because the crash that we had in 2008 was not the crash I was referring to when I wrote my book, Crash Proof. It's the one that's about to happen. Because when I wrote the first book in 2007, although I wrote it in 2005, it came out in 2007, I said that the housing bubble was going to pop and it was going to cause the worst recession since the Great Depression. We'd have double-digit unemployment, trillion-dollar deficits. The government was going to do all the wrong things. It was going to try to reflate the bubble. And I thought that policy response to everything that I was predicting would create the real crash. Really, the only thing I got wrong in that book was I didn't think the government would succeed in reflating the bubble. I just thought they would try. And in particular, they could survive the popping of the real estate bubble. I knew it would be tough, but I knew we could survive it. I knew that the bubble the government would attempt to inflate in the aftermath, when that one popped, that would be impossible because I thought they would destroy the dollar. But they didn't, because foreigners believed the Fed, everybody believed the Fed, that QE was temporary and that the balance sheet could be normalized. Interest rates could return to normal. The balance sheet could shrink back to a pre-crisis level. I knew that wasn't the case. I knew that wasn't true the entire time. And I kept waiting for the Fed to reverse course and stop hiking rates and go back to QE. And it took them longer than I thought. I think the election of Donald Trump kind of bought some extra time, enabled the bubble to get bigger. But that bubble has now popped. And, believe me, I mean, I had no idea that the pin to pop this bubble would be the coronavirus. I mean, even when I first heard about the coronavirus, I thought people were, overplaying it. I didn't think it would be that big a deal. I said so on my podcast. But then as I started to get more data, a few days later, less than a week later, before the market really started to collapse, I said on my podcast that, I think the coronavirus is going to be a much bigger deal than what I first thought. Little did I know it would be this big a deal. Little did I know that the entire country would lose its collective mind, not necessarily the fact that people are, hunkering down and not socializing and trying to help contain the spread of the virus. I mean, I'm not even going to argue whether that's the correct thing to do or not. I'm here in Puerto Rico. And by the way, normally, I would do this from my studio. When I did the last live shots, I was in my home in Connecticut. I have that home studio and it's all fancy and it has, good cameras and backdrops. I have something similar here in my office in Puerto Rico, but I didn't feel like going into my office. So I just am recording this from my house. So I'm just using my laptop. So the lighting isn't all professional and everything, and I'm not in the studio. But I know this is what a lot of people are doing these days. They're just at home. And so I figured I'd do this podcast from home. But a lot of stuff is going on in Puerto Rico. There are mandatory curfews from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. All the non-essential businesses have been ordered shut. So, we really are a hunker down. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what everybody is saying the government needs to do about the economic downturn. Because while I didn't predict the pin, right? I didn't know that the coronavirus would prick the bubble. I did know that we had a bubble economy. And I did know that eventually it would find a pin. It didn't even matter what that pin was, although this pin has a lot of implications for the global economy, not just the U.S. economy. I get that. But this pin has pricked the biggest bubble that the Federal Reserve has ever inflated. And now the air is coming out. And at this point, it doesn't even matter what happens to that pin. I mean, I hope we can cure the coronavirus. I mean, I'm not talking about the human issue here and the health issue. I'm talking about the financial issue, the economic issue. The damage is already done. The cat's out of this bag. This bubble is popped. And there's a lot of air that's going to come out of it. But the big problem is the government's response. I'm hearing these people on financial television saying that, we need helicopter money, right? The government has to, provide helicopter money. And these guys are so clueless, they don't even know that when Milton Friedman came up with the idea, coined the term helicopter money, it was a joke. He was using it as an example of what not to do, about why Keynesian monetary stimulus doesn't work. He said it's a crazy, stupid idea. It's like dropping money from helicopters, because dropping money from helicopters doesn't do anything. It's just inflation. It just makes prices go up. Everybody says we need more money. That's the last thing we need. We need more stuff. We need to produce. We need to go out there and innovate and create. We need entrepreneurship. We need production and things like that. Just money, adding money doesn't add anything of value. It's just paper. The problem is all the debt that we have. The problem isn't the bubble, or the pin rather. The problem is the bubble. You've got all these people. The president now is on television today saying he's a wartime president. This is like World War II. We got to sacrifice like we did in World War II. Except in World War II, people did sacrifice. Nobody got a bailout. Not a single company. Not a single person. World War II is obviously much worse than this. 16 million men went off to war. Young men, many of them died. You know how many people died in World War II worldwide? It's like 80 million people. I mean, think about what could have been more disruptive to global commerce and the economy. You think people were traveling during World War II? Think they were getting on cruise ships or taking vacations or going? No, they were fighting a war. Our housewives were working in factories. Everybody was pitching in. But not only did people not get bailout checks from the government tripled taxes during World War II. In 1941, 3% of the American public pay the income tax. 1942, 30% of the American public pay the income tax. And then the U.S. government borrowed the equivalent of $1 trillion from American citizens who put all their money into war bonds, right? How was the U.S. government able to tax and borrow so much money from the American public? Because the American public had the savings. We had a viable economy in 1941. That's how come we could fight the war and win the war. We don't have a viable economy now. All of our troops are leveraged to the hilt. How can the U.S. government, the biggest debtor of them all, bail out other debtors? How can the U.S. government lend money when it has no money? How can it guarantee other people's debts when it can't pay its own debts? Now, everybody thinks, well, they don't need to do that. They can just print money. We can just create money out of thin air. The Federal Reserve is going to pay everybody's rent, everybody's mortgage. No, everybody can just sit home and wait for your stimulus checks. Those stimulus checks aren't going to buy anything. That is the crisis. A week ago, and I said this on my podcast, and by the way, if you're new to this, if you're not listening to my podcast, go back and listen to like the last 10. Listen to everything that I've been saying since this stuff started to implode, so you can see that. And by the way, all this stuff, from the return to quantitative easing, going back to zero, the bank bailouts, everything that's happening is what I predicted. Now, I didn't predict it would happen because of the coronavirus. I just knew it would happen because of something. If it wasn't the coronavirus, it eventually would have happened. This accelerated the process a little bit, and now it's happening at a very quick pace. But people think that this is going to work. But if you go back to my podcast that I wrote about the bond market bubble, and the title was, did the fiscal stimulus just prick the bond bubble? Well, we now know the answer to that question. Yes, the bond bubble is pricked. Bond prices are collapsing almost as fast as stock prices. People who piled into U.S. Treasuries last Monday, 7 days ago, as a safe haven, probably lost about 20% of their money. And if they did it on leverage, they lost even more than that. So that's blown up. Today, people are piling into the U.S. dollar, and they've been doing that for the last several days. The U.S. dollar isn't a safe haven either. And the people who are buying dollars are about to blow up and watch their purchasing power evaporate. Because we all assume that the Fed can just create as much money as it wants, that it can create tens of trillions of dollars. Remember, we're bailing out everybody, bailing out the airlines, bailing out the hotels, bailing out the manufacturers, bailing out the plane manufacturers, the automobile manufacturers, bailing out the hotels, bailing out the individual workers. This is bailout nation. We're bailing out everybody. How can we bail out everybody? Who's going to do the bailing? The government doesn't have any money, right? It only has money that it takes from the people. There is an old saying, it's not actually that old, but people forget it. It's the people that support the government. The government can never support the people. So all these American people looking to the government to help them, the government doesn't have any money that it doesn't take from the people. So if the government is giving to everybody, where does it get it? Well, we think we're going to get it from the Fed. Well, we can only get it from the Fed as long as the world is willing to buy up those dollars. But it's not going to happen. See, the problem is we've been borrowing all this money from China, from Japan, from Germany. Well, guess what? They got the coronavirus over there too. They can't lend us any more of their savings. They need their savings themselves, right? The whole world can't be a borrower. There's got to be a lender for every borrower. We can't tap the surplus nations because now they need their savings for themselves. The same things with goods. We import almost everything we consume as far as manufactured goods. Well, you know what? The countries that are manufacturing that stuff, they got the coronavirus. They're not going to manufacture as much stuff. And what they do manufacture, they're going to consume themselves. So all the goods are going to stop coming into the United States. And all the lending is going to stop coming. And all we're going to have is the money that the Fed is creating and dropping from helicopters. So the real crash that's coming, the real crisis, is a dollar crisis. All the money the Fed is printing isn't going to have value. It's not going to buy anything. Prices are going to skyrocket. And in fact, this coronavirus is accelerating that process because the coronavirus is reducing the supply of goods available to buy. Once everybody finishes lining up at the supermarkets and the drugstores to buy out the inventory, what's going to be left? Once Amazon finishes these deliveries, are they going to have more products